So the first part is, one, as leaders, we have to recognize one of the biggest fallacies in leadership is that people act and think just like us. The truth is, if you're watching this and you're a team leader, ask yourself, would you join a team? Would you join your team? Probably not, because you would have been on a team right now, right? So the people that are joining your team are nothing like you. Otherwise, they'd be running their own team. If they were just like you, they'd be running their own team because you're running your own team.
No team goes without its fair share of drama. And whenever something happens, whenever the boat gets rocked even a little bit, if you can choreograph the change, if you can choreograph, around the problem, everything's fine. Everything's smooth sailing.
The amount of listings you get signed is not necessarily something you can control. And I know you can debate that, but not necessarily something that's 100% in your control. Goals don't mean very much nowadays. Goals are something that would be great if it happened, but probably won't, right? That's the goal. That's what that means.
Welcome to the Refuge Leadership and Retention Roadmap Playbook. Danny Gould here with Isaac Guzman, the man, the myth, the legend. What's up, brother?
I'm just excited to be here, man. The Refuge, it's what I need, and so I'm glad to give back.
Yeah, man. Super excited to chat with you, and obviously you have a ton of experience leading and in leadership, in retention, formerly with the #1 EXP team in the world, right? Not just the United
Correct.
States, right? In the world.
In the world.
I love how they always say that,
For
like
volume.
in the world. Who are the number one team
In the world. For volume.
For volume.
You always got to qualify for volume, not unit count.
Not sides.
Yeah, that's
Cool, man. Well, listen, I mean, I think the first thing that pops in my head when I think recruiting not recruiting, that's a separate one. When I think leadership, when I think retention, we're going to be talking tactically here, right? Like this is strategy, this is tactics. And so, but to go alongside of that, I think before we get into like the nuts and bolts of like the different, accountability groups, quarterly meetings, all this stuff, like it's a lot of shit. And I think that for someone that is maybe growing their team right now, they're thinking, I am growing my team so that I don't have to work as much, right? But all of these things mean more work. Like, you mean I have to like meet with my agents every single week, one-on-one? You mean that I have to run quarterly leadership meetings? You mean that I have to run, these 6-8 week long like accountability groups? So why does someone need to do this? Like, let's just start there. Like, why does someone need to implement the things that we're about to talk about today?
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty simple. If you want to level up as a team, you have to be able to do these things. So here's what I mean by that. You're no longer in the game of selling real estate, right? You're in the game of leadership. That's the stone cold truth. So the reason that you want to implement these systems is because one of the hardest things to do on the planet is to manage people. People are crazy. Mm-hmm. I'm including myself in that, right? It's tough to manage other people. What you want to do is you want to manage systems that manage people. And so what these are basically systems to help manage people, whether it's accountability, conversion, community, right? Those types of things. You implement systems that you can manage as opposed to having to manage all the people. So it's critically important that you do these things.
And when you say systems, because that just put like a light bulb in my head, right? So like as a team leader, if you're growing your team, so if you're in say like that growth phase, like that 5 to 10, 15 agents or so, this is probably something that a team leader is going to be doing at first, but if they can systematize it, this is something that they could eventually pass off to someone like yourself, right? Like a sales director for them to run. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. And more importantly, even if you're always the person running it, if you have it systematized, just like your listing process, right? Like there's nobody launching a team, at least that should be launching a team, that doesn't have a very defined listing process. Mm-hmm. I get the lead, make the call, I put it in the calendar, I send out the high note, I send out the pre-listing packet, the listing packet gets put together, I pull title, I pull tax records, right? I do all this, I show up, I get it signed, I hand it over to my listing coordinator, like that kind of process, so that they're not winging it every listing, right? That's how we get to a place where we're winning in the first place in real estate. So you have to realize that whether it's coaching on a weekly basis, it's okay if you're still doing those things, but don't show up without a system, right? Because when you have to figure things out on the fly, it wastes a lot of time and energy. And really all that leadership is about energy management. Like you think about time management, you can't manage time. You and I have never made an hour longer or shorter just by sheer force of will. That's impossible. Time management's actually an illusion, right? The things that you can manage are choices and energy. And so here's all I'm saying, and without getting super philosophical on you about that topic, is when I have a system for managing people and I manage that system really well, it requires less effort and energy. So the example I would use is self-directed accountability groups, which we can get into whenever you're ready. But that's one of the things where it's like, I show up, I know this system for these 6 weeks. I know what program I'm running, and the results will vary, sure, but I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time I feel like, hey, my agents need additional assistance in honoring commitments and being accountable to their goals.
Yeah. And
but
that makes
the added bonus, by the way, to your point, the added bonus is you can hand that off to other people.
Right. And as you were saying that, like, by the way, for context, for anyone who's watching this, like Isaac coached me for like several years when I was growing my team in Silicon Valley. And as you were saying that right now, I'm actually thinking about everything that we're about to talk about in like a completely different light, because I never really equated it to the listing presentation, but it's actually the exact same thing, right? Because you're right. When I was a solo agent at the beginning of my career, every listing was different. Like I didn't have a process, right? And every listing was a fucking project, right? Like every single listing was just a massive undertaking. And then eventually I got smart. I started getting, SOPs, checklists, all that good stuff in place. And then all of a sudden it was like taking a listing was the easiest thing in the world, right? Like I loved listings because I had a process, and Heather, my assistant at the time, took care of like 95% of the things, right? So all I had to do was go in there, get it signed, 6%, hopefully 7, but 6 is nice. And then just give it to Heather, right? Then she takes it the rest of the way. But in terms of like, you mentioned it. And so let's just dive right into it, right? Like enough philosophy. Let's get into the tactics. So you mentioned agent accountability groups. Let's start there. Let's just start with like, what is the definition of them? What are they? And then we can go from there.
Yeah. So an agent accountability group is something that, I inherited from a coach of mine and made some tweaks to it to adjust for what made sense for us. But at its core, it's a facilitation of commitments that agents are honoring or not honoring. And I'll share that, but it's a facilitation of commitment conversations, because here's the reality. Goals don't mean very much nowadays, right? You've heard me share this story before. I'll share it for this, just in case for everybody, is, hey, you're going to fly to San Diego and come hang out with me, and your flight lands at 9:30. Well, we talk about it today, but in 2 weeks, when you're actually flying, you give me a call in the air, and when you're about to take off, and say, hey, Isaac, I land at 9:30. Are you still planning on picking me up? And I go, that's the goal. You automatically are like, I guess I got to get an Uber. Because the goal is something now defined in our society. Goals are something that would be great if it happened, but probably won't, right? That's the goal. That's what that means. And so in self-directed accountability groups or accountability groups for the team, what it is, it's helping people understand that goals are meaningless without the critical piece, which is specific commitments. So use that same example. You call me, you go, hey, Isaac, I land at 9:30. Or you got me, you're going to pick me up. And I go, that's the goal. And as a matter of fact, I'm committed to leaving my house by 8:45 to make sure I'm there and have time to find parking. Now you're like, I'm going to rest easy. I don't got to worry. Isaac's got it covered. And it wasn't because the goal that I set, it was the commitment that I made to support that goal. Right. So what accountability groups are, it's typically a 6-week group meeting that we have. And these groups vary anywhere in size from about 8 people to 12. I mean, obviously you can do it much smaller, but let's say you're working with a team of 60, 70, 80, or a brokerage. This works at a brokerage level too. 60, 70, 80 people. We typically break them out into 8 to 12, knowing that some people are going to fall out. But what it is, it's really simple at its core. It's a weekly meeting where we sit down for an hour, and there's very specific rules around it. But what we do is we sit there for an hour and we outline 3 specific commitments that we plan to honor, that we intend to honor over the next 7 days. 2 of which are business related, 1 of which is personal, right? So it might be, I'm going to knock 50 doors 3 times this week. I'm going to put out 3 reels a day for the next 5 days. And I'm going to start my 75 hard program on Thursday, right? Something like that. And people will do that. And what we then do is we then, with respect and using us as a reflecting surface, we scrutinize those commitments and we say, is that actually going to help accomplish the goal? Or is it something that actually is different or applies more pressure and creates more tension so that you can grow? Right. Here's what I mean by that. Danny, I always like to pick on you about your fitness, right? Because you're like extremely fit. So
thanks,
here's
man.
Here's an unacceptable commitment from Danny. I'm going to go to the gym 5 times this week. Unacceptable. Why? Because that happens whether or not you make a commitment about it.
Right.
That's being lazy. Now, if you go, I'm going to do 2-a-days, 5 days a week, that's different because that's applying a different degree of pressure to your workout. Now, you might be doing it 7 days a week. I don't know, right? But you get the point. If someone's already doing the thing, that's not what this is about. It's about commitment to being better, a commitment to stretching, or what I call applying more tension. Because the growth is not a one-dimensional thing. It requires 2 major components: tension and safety, right? You can't just go put 700 pounds on the squat bar and then try to squat it your first time out. That's unsafe. Plenty of tension, but it's unsafe. You're not going to see growth. You're going to get an injury. Then you're going to be injured and not be able to, and then not be able to work out. And then you'll actually lose, won't gain, right? At the same time, if you are lifting just the bar for the next 5 years, you will not see any growth either. There's not enough tension. There's plenty of safety and not enough tension. So in our commitments that we are making on a regular basis every single week, 2 business, 1 personal, we have to have the group as a collective help us filter out whether or not this is a safe and it has enough safety and has enough tension to actually see growth, right? So here's the other factors of it, is that we also say, okay, great. Those are, you go and write them down on the board in front of everybody. Okay, here's my 2 professional, 1 personal. People then get an opportunity to question, hey, do you think that's really in your control? Do you think that's a smart goal, right? Do you think that's a smart commitment, meaning specific, measurable, actionable, all those things, right? Do you think you can actually control that? Because we have to make commitments and things that we can control. So I'll give you an example. The amount of listings you get signed is not necessarily something you can control. And I know you can debate that, but not necessarily something that's 100% in your control.
Yeah.
Whereas the number of times you ask for them to sign the listing agreement on an appointment, you can control that. You go, I'm not leaving any listing appointment that I go on this week without asking for them to sign the listing agreement 3 times. You can control that, right? Even as they kick you out, you can ask 1 more time to get that 3rd in. Hey, but would you sign? They're like, I'm going to shoot you. I still can control that I asked them to sign that last time.
Yeah.
Right. So what we do then on there is, how do we have the accountability piece? Is 1, everybody knows there's going to be a meeting the next week, but then 2, every single week you get a new partner, and that partner and you have a 4th unspoken commitment, which is we will check in every single day with each other, whether it's text, phone call, meeting for coffee, jumping on a Zoom, whatever. But every single day over the next 7 days, we're going to check in and say, hey, how you doing? There's no guidance around what that conversation has to look like. It just simply has to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the other commitment. So what we do is the next week we come back and we check in. And when we check in, what we're doing is we have to help them understand what true accountability is. The underlying way to facilitate this is by being a real accountability partner, not a despot. So here's what I mean. Most people are afraid of accountability. And the reason they're afraid of accountability is because in their past, they have experienced accountability as condemnation and judgment.
Right.
Flat out. Why didn't you do this? What's wrong with you? How come you can't get it together? Where is the result that I told you needed to deliver? That's how we all experience, most of us experience accountability. So even saying we're going to do accountability groups scares some people. Okay? But anyways, what I have to do as a facilitator is I have to observe and notice and be a reflective surface for them without any condemnation or judgment. So the conversation is, hey, Danny, here are your 3 commitments. Did you honor your commitments? And they say yes or no. And there's a lot of talking points here, but one of the things I make sure they understand is, hey, the great thing about commitments is they're black and white. You did or you didn't. And you don't need to defend yourself. There's no reason to create excuses. You either did or did not. So when I ask if you honored your commitments, the answer is a yes or a no. There's no reason. And by the way, as a facilitator, this is my face when they say they honored commitments. This is my face when they say they didn't honor commitments.
Okay.
Because I'm a reflective surface. I'm not there to create any judgment around whether they did or didn't. Doesn't mean I'm going to let them get away with not honoring their commitments. I have a talk track that I walk them through that helps them stay accountable.
What is that talk track? Let's role play that, right?
Into it. Yeah. Oh yeah, perfect. Role play. So, hey, Danny, last week you had 3 commitments. It was knock 5 doors a day, make 20 calls a day from the database, and do 2 a days in preparation for your CrossFit tournament that you have coming up. Mm-hmm. Did you honor your commitments?
Almost.
Okay. So which ones did you honor any of them completely?
I worked out a lot. I did my personal commitment.
Or did you do the 2 a days?
I did the 2 a days.
Sweet. Man.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. How about the knocking?
I didn't do all of those. I only got like maybe 12 a day.
12 a day. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the calls, were you able to do that inside the database?
Sorry. The calls were 20 a day, right? So the calls, I did 12 a day.
12 a day. How about the 5 knocks a day?
I did the 5 knocks.
Oh, awesome. So the calls, interesting. So, what got in your way?
Well, my friend called me on Tuesday and I picked up. He was in a bind. He said he needed a ride somewhere. So, I left the office early and I had only made, I didn't make any calls that day. And so that happened on Tuesday. And then Friday, I was prepping for my open house all day and I just couldn't find the time to make the calls. And so I didn't do any calls on Friday either.
And find the time. Okay. That makes sense, man. Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
Well, I probably wouldn't have picked up the phone when my friend called me on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And then, cause I obviously didn't end up getting me closer to my goal. And then Friday, I probably could have been smarter with my time on Thursday, prepped a little bit more on Thursday, or done double the calls on Thursdays, knowing that Friday I wasn't going to have the time to actually do the thing on Friday.
Cool, man. That makes sense. That sounds like a good, reasonable plan. And next week, probably some degree of that you'll implement. So just out of curiosity, Danny, in the realm of all things possible, let's zoom in on let's just pick Wednesday. In the realm of all things possible, could you have gotten it done on Wednesday? Could you have gotten the 20 calls in?
Yeah, I probably could have.
Yeah. What level of sacrifice, or what would you have had to sacrifice, or what inconvenience would you have had to suffer in order to make it happen on Wednesday?
Yeah, I mean, I probably just could have gone home a little bit later, stayed at the office longer, and or even made the calls from home. Once I got back from dropping my friend off.
Yeah, makes sense. So remind me again of the goal for this year.
I was supposed to sell 25 homes this year.
Cool. According to who? You said supposed to
according to me.
Okay. I was making sure I didn't give you that number or something.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
Okay.
You didn't. That was my goal.
I was supposed to.
Yeah.
Cool. So if you sell the 25 homes, what does that do for you? What does that accomplish?
I can finally buy that new BMW that I was hoping to buy, and I'd like to buy a house too. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. And so would that be like you sell the 25 homes, you have the down payment for the house and you're ready to rock, or tell me a little bit more about that.
I'd probably have enough, or very, very close, you know, I'd be very close.
So would that be your first house? Remind me.
Mhm.
That's awesome, man. What would owning your first house do for you?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I guess it would make me feel like I'm not just selling a dream, right? Like I'm selling something that I actually have done before, you know, which is nice.
Yeah. So give you a little bit more confidence and conviction when you're out there selling.
Exactly.
And if you were able to do that, like what does that do for you long term? What does that look like?
I think I'd just become a better realtor, you know, if I did that, honestly.
All right. And then what real estate's a vehicle. You're a better realtor now. Where's that taking you? Just numbers, or tell me a little bit more about that.
I mean, I'd like to just keep building my portfolio and keep building my sales, pipeline and keep selling more houses.
Okay, cool. And portfolio, you mean like a rental portfolio or something?
Yeah, exactly. Like I'd like to own more than just one property. Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome, man. And real estate investing is a huge aspiration for most agents. I totally get it, man. I mean, that's where I started my career, right?
Yep.
Owning rentals, what is that going to do for you? Like, how does that play into the long term for you?
Well, I mean, it would just set me up and ideally like my future family up for success. I've read a lot of books. I've done a lot of listening to podcasts on bigger pockets and stuff. And and I think that like just building that portfolio would it would do a lot for me.
Create some foundation for your future family. That's awesome, man.
Exactly.
So sorry, I'm just interested. I don't think we've ever had that conversation. So sorry if I took up anybody's time, but I thought it was important to just kind of get to know that for you. Because those are big goals, right? Future family, having that financial security, the foundation, your validation in your career, and the conviction to be able to go out and sell more. So you said the sacrifice you would have had to make was maybe come back to the office and go home a little later, right? Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah, or just make the calls from home.
Or just make the calls from home, which, dude, I'll be honest, it's inconvenient. Like I work from home sometimes and it feels clunky. So the question I think that has to come to mind is this, is that inconvenience and sacrifice worth setting up your future family for the foundation that they want? Owning real estate, having a portfolio, buying your first house, selling the 25 homes. Like, is that sacrifice worth that goal?
Yeah, well, I guess when you put it that way, absolutely. You know,
gotcha. Right? Now I wouldn't say the gotcha part. What I'm doing in that talk track, and so I'll finish the talk track right there, but notice what I'm doing in that talk track. I'm actually helping you understand the juxtaposition between your tiny little excuse that seemed big that day and what you really want in life, and understand that by you blowing off your calls on Wednesday, you sacrificed or at least kicked that can down the road for the big things you want in life.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I finish up, they go, yeah, actually, when you say it like that, and I go, yeah, well, that's what I'm helping you understand is like blowing off today's productivity is not blowing off today's productivity. It's pushing your dreams further out, right? When we don't honor those commitments. So Danny, what would you like to commit to now? Then they go through the commitments and then we go, right. So Danny, that's awesome. How can we support you in that? Mm-hmm. Well, this and the other, this, that, right? And they go on through that. And then ultimately, every time somebody writes their commitments up there, we go, okay, so Danny, I just want to make sure, especially after we scrutinize, right? Let's say you go, hey, I want to do 20 calls a day. Actually, I want to do 50 calls a day. This happens a lot. I want to do 50 calls a day now because I didn't do the 20. So I feel like I'm in a deficit because Isaac, you kind of just scared me.
Yeah.
And someone smart, and if it's not me, it'll be someone else. But usually it has to be me the first couple of weeks until people kind of get the hang of this. Someone will go, well, if you couldn't get 20 done, how are you going to get 50 done? Like, what are you going to do to make sure that happens? And then or sometimes people will go, well, if you really want to hit your numbers, you should be doing 25. And then Danny goes, oh, okay, never mind, 25. And I go, hold on. We're not here to assume other people's commitments. Mm-hmm. Danny, I want to know what your commitment is. And by the way, I think it might actually make sense for you to drop that number down to 10 to build some consistency. But again, I don't want you to choose 10 because I said so. I want you to choose what you're committed to. Now, as a side note, and I might even say this actually, but this is worth knowing. Most of us hate accountability and making commitments because most of us experience condemnation and judgment, sure, but also as other people's imposition on us. So here's what I always remember this. I loved math. For some reason, I just got it as a kid. Okay. I would never do the amount of problems my teachers assigned me. Ever. I don't know that I ever did it. You got to do 50 problems out of chapter 2. Never did them. I'd do enough to where I felt like I seen all the different types of problems and I understood the concept and I was done. And I would get in arguments all the time with my math teachers. You have to do the assignment. You have to do the assignment. I'm like, I don't know that I do. The rubric says if I get that homework only accounts for 10% of my grade, I can still technically get an A without having done that. And what I didn't like, and by the way, that wasn't a smart thing to do, but the rebellious part of me was like, I'm not going to do 50 problems because you said so. I'm going to do the amount I believe is necessary.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when you take on other people's imposed commitments, you're less likely to do them because they don't mean anything to you. So that's another thing to watch out for. When people are suggesting a different version of this commitment, make sure that that person understands that that is ultimately a commitment they have to come up with, and other people can provide guidance, sure, but by no means should you just assume other people's commitments based on their suggestions.
So that actually leads me to a question that I think is going to come up in a lot of team leaders' minds. And it certainly came up for me many, many times. And I'm sure that you experienced this too, where, you're running an agent accountability group and someone gets up there and they're like, yeah, my commitment is like, I'm going to like knock 3 doors a day. I'm going to make 4 phone calls and I'm going to take a 10-minute walk around the neighborhood every single day. And you're like, you're a fucking loser. So and by the way, like, you taught me how to kind of overcome this, but I think that this is a valuable lesson for every single person who runs a team, because if you are running a team, you are a high achiever. Like, that is like your first hour of the day, what I just described there. And that is like, like a lot of people on your team though, like that is their like full day. Like that is like, wow, like, whew, I'm sweating.
Can't believe I did it.
I can't, like good for me. Right. So how do you find that balance between, like acknowledging that not everyone is wired like you, while also having enough tension and knowing like, dude, there's no way you're going to get to your freaking goals if you only do that. Right. So how do you let's address the first problem, right? Which is how do you deal with that? And then also like, then we'll come back to the, like, how do you support them if you know that those goals aren't going to be it?
Yeah. So the first part is, one, as leaders, we have to recognize one of the biggest fallacies in leadership is that people act and think just like us. The truth is, if you're watching this and you're a team leader, ask yourself, would you join a team? Would you join your team? Probably not, because you would have been on a team right now. Right? So the people that are joining your team are nothing like you. Otherwise, they'd be running their own team. If they were just like you, they'd be running their own team because you're running your own team. Pretty simple, right? So you have to be okay with the fact that that exists, right? And I'm not saying this is a direct comparison, but it is a good analogy of like, do you ever get mad at the person that works at McDonald's? The person that took your order, you're like, no, let me backtrack. Do you ever get mad at the person that works at McDonald's for working at McDonald's?
Oh, no, of course.
Yeah. You're never like, you know what? I want the Egg McMuffin, but I just can't live with the fact that you will settle for working at McDonald's. I got to do something about this. No. Right?
Nah.
Like you understand that whatever got that person to be working the drive-thru at McDonald's is their version of their life right now. And you have to be okay with that and meet people where they're at. So that's the first part. Like it's a you problem first. Let's deal with the you problem first. Not everybody's like you. And if they were, they'd be your competition, not your agent. That's first. Second, financially. If this person's brand new, this is a different story. But if this person they sell 6 to 10 homes a year, 4 to 5 homes a year consistently on your team, person and this is their target. You have to recognize, like, think about that. For the next 3 years, they're helping pay somebody's base salary, right? Or someone's bonus structure. So you do have to understand that, like, there's a place for people like that inside your organization, or there isn't. That's a personal choice. Right?
Sure.
So if you're like, minimum, you have to sell this much, then yeah, you're going to have to eat this person up. I'm sorry, you will. There is no like way to super finesse that. I mean, we'll talk about it in just a second, but you do have to recognize, like, oof, this person needs to be coached up or out. But then there's other organizations where you go, that's completely fine. I don't care if that person ever sells more than 4 houses for the rest of their life per year. Right? Now, there is a challenge with like not allowing it to be a contagion, right? Like not allowing that philosophy to spread. So that's a whole different thing. We'll talk about that in just a second. But how do I, so first off, it's a me problem. I have to recognize, hey dude, let's set my ego aside. No one's like me. As a matter of fact, you might even take pride in that. Like, that's what I do before I do all that before you even wake up. Awesome. Good for you. Like, that's probably why you live a different life than them. And it should just be left there. Right?
Right.
The other piece is this. I have to recognize that some people do need to understand what it's like to sacrifice and push harder to get the goals that they want. So I will have a very similar conversation about what are they looking to accomplish. So if they go, it's this and it's that and it's this, I go, so can you remind me again what your goal was? And then I go through that whole thing that we just went over, which is what's your goal? Okay, what will that do for you? What will that do for you? What will that do for you? Notice in that first conversation that we had, that first role play, I had to keep asking you, what would that do for you? What would that do for you? Because you said you wanted to buy a new BMW and a house. Now, to me, I'm fine that that's your goal, but that's not what's going to help. I'm not going to get any meat out of that. When you're having a tough day, a tough time, you really need to apply pressure to yourself. You're not going to do it for the car. You just won't. Right? Now, if your future family's life and foundation of their finances is at risk, that's something different. Right? Now, it might not ever be the future family. It might be the dog shelter you want to open, right? Like, it doesn't really matter, but I need to get deep on that. And what I want to help this person understand is that when they choose to earn and have low production, they are making a sacrifice. They're sacrificing future. They're sacrificing financial security. And here's the other thing. Maybe they're not. Maybe their significant other's a baller and they just do this as a side thing. Right? Yeah. That's something that's something I got to be okay with. But again, when I recognize that I need to coach this person up, what I want to do is help them understand that their activities will never amount to the life that they want. I can't talk to them about numbers until I get to know what life they want to live is that the numbers unlock. Like, those numbers unlock something. I need to find out what that is. And then I need to be smart about reverse engineering that life to a financial number, right? To an income number. So lifestyle, I need to reverse engineer that back to, okay, well, how much money do you need to make to fund that lifestyle? And then I need to backwards from there all the way to what should your activity look like on a daily basis, or at least a weekly basis. And then be realistic about, here's what that kind of activity looks like based on the commitments that you've made in terms of your sources of leads, right? And here's what I eventually do. I go, listen, I can't, so let's say we did all that and I go like this, Danny, the question you need to ask yourself that I can't answer for you, 100% can't answer for you, is, are you okay with not getting that done? Are you okay with not accomplishing that? Because I'm telling you right now, 4 calls a day, 5 days a week, I just proved to you that this does not equal that money, and therefore it doesn't equal that lifestyle. So here's the thing. Are you okay with that? Because if you are, totally fine. And if you're not, I'll help you with the plan to get to where you want to go. Then if they say, here's actually the biggest problem. The biggest problem is they go, yeah, I want to do more. That's a big problem, right? Because it's rarely a numbers thing that they didn't know that they needed to be doing more than 4 calls. They knew that. Yeah. Problem is their level of sacrifice that they're willing to take or willing to make isn't on par. Right. Because it works the other way around too. You ever have anybody watching this, and I know you've been through this, Danny, you ever have somebody on your team that you know can sell 50 houses, but they only sell 20 every single year? And then here's what makes it even more confusing. Every year they go, I'm going to sell 36 homes. And they can blow that out of the water. They can do 50. They say they're going to sell 36 and they only sell 17 to 20 every single year. Yeah. Here's what actually is happening. Most of the time, they see the person who sells 50 a year, and somewhere in the back of their mind, they go, not willing to make that sacrifice. I know what that person's life is like, and I'm not willing to do that little bit more. And so it's up to us to recognize that and not put pressure on that person anymore.
Right.
They're going to be a 17 to 20 unit person all day. Why are we making them feel bad about outproducing most of their peers?
Yeah.
That's the other thing that comes up a lot is the person who's low. There's two types of sandbaggers, right? The person's like, that's ridiculous. And the person that's like, dude, I know you could do more. Right. Now, not allowing it to be a contagion.
Yes.
That's another thing. Here's what we have to recognize is we have to let them know. So remind me of your goal. Remind me of what you want to do. And if they go, oh, I want to sell 6 homes. Go, okay, what are you going to do with that? They go there, go, awesome. Danny, that's so amazing, man. That for you and what matters to you in your world, 6 sales gets that done. That's awesome. So for anybody else who might not have, and I like to go to the high and low, for anybody else that might not have aspirations to buy a rental property like Danny does, you might not even need to hit 6. And for those of us who have bigger aspirations, we should look at what Danny just said and say, hey, you know what? That's great for him, but I need to push harder. I need to make more sacrifice, right? In other words, what I'm helping people understand is he's a watermark somewhere here, and you can judge yourself based on that, whether or not you want to live that life.
Gotcha.
Right?
So you kind of call out what their goal is, right? In comparison to their activity, so that other people
everyone needs to be aware that this person's activity is going to get them that life at best. And if you don't want that life, if you want a better life than that,
yep,
you got to do more.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The other thing is this, and the other thing is this. I actually set expectations when people join the team. I go, hey, this is what you want to do. Here's what I promise you. You're going to run into people that are going to outwork you because they want more. Don't feel embarrassed or ashamed. They just want more out of life, and they're willing to put it in. The other thing is you're going to run into people who don't want what you want. They don't have to work as hard as you. They have a spouse paying the bills, or they have lower aspirations. You're also going to see them sit around and goof off and not put in the work. And neither one of those should affect you. Do not play down to the level of the people that don't have the same goals as you. In other words, you're going to walk in and you're going to see some people calling like crazy, shooting content like crazy, running open houses 2 days every single week, week in, week out.
Yeah.
Answering all the calls. You're going to see those people. You're also going to see people who are sitting around doing the bare minimum, who just stumble into deals. Here's the thing that they don't have. They don't have a sign on their chest or on their back that says, I have small goals. I'm okay with making $30,000 a year. They don't say that to you. They don't have that written on their chest. So you can't just judge their actions and say, well, if they can get away with that, so can I. Can't do that. Right? We put a plan together specifically for your goals. Nobody else has the exact same goals as you. So nobody else is going to work at the same level you are going to work. So do not judge your work and your effort and your activity based on anybody else inside this room. Unless with 100% certainty, you know they're trying to do exactly what you're trying to do and have actually accomplished it.
That is brilliant. And honestly, okay, so for anyone that's watching this right now and you have a process in place, like you're onboarding like you should write that dialogue down and implement it right away, because I will tell you, this will, at some point in the future, you will retain an agent that you probably shouldn't have retained because you said this. I have lost agents because they felt like they were outworking everyone. And they were just like, dude, like I am putting in so much more work than all these lazy, it was actually funny because I lost some of my top performers because they felt like the culture was here, right? And they were here. Now I wanted the culture to be here. The problem is that they didn't realize they were They're wired differently. Right? They're the creme de la creme, and this is normal, right? And so if you can put that in your presentation, I would say do it sooner rather than later, because it's just like when you go into a listing presentation, and the listing presentation is actually the setup for the reduction conversation, right? Lots of things that you say in the listing presentation can and will be used against the seller during the reduction conversation, almost inevitably, if you frame it correctly. Same thing with retention conversations, right? Or even like you said, like preventing the spread, right? The contagion of, if you have that conversation with people and then you remind them during the accountability group subtly, right? Hey, I could see that working beautifully without creating a ton of conflict within the organization, without putting a target on anyone's back, without anyone feeling bad about themselves. Cause that's the issue, right? Is that like, at some point you're going to ruffle some feathers if you don't finesse the situation early enough and set it up like that. I wish I had that dialogue, dude. Is that new? Cause like I don't remember getting that.
It may be newer than when we were coaching every single week.
Yeah.
And here's the reality though. When you want to know where that dialogue came from? It came from me screwing up before and being in that situation where there was too much tension in that room around like, hey guys, like, close your ears, earmuffs. Don't listen to this lazy bum. Right?
I know. Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, I can't undo what just happened.
Yeah.
But I can prevent it from happening in the future.
Yep.
And so what's wild is this, how little time, and I'm not calling anybody anything other than just a human, but how little time we as team leaders spend crafting specific dialogue to head stuff off before it happens. It's wild, right? And you know this from day one. I think one of the first things we talked about was there's strategy and there's choreography.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much every team leader is amazing at strategy.
Yep.
And most of them are really bad at choreography. Because once they have the strategy, they're like, great, all I got to do is tell everybody what we're going to do moving forward.
Yeah.
And everyone's sitting in the audience at team meeting going like, what the just happened?
Yeah.
What, how did it like, huh? Because they just go, okay, well, we sold 7 houses last week and we did this. And oh, by the way, like we're changing splits and then, okay, right? Like there's no choreography to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I know buddies who have lost agents when increasing splits. Matter of fact, not even a buddy. That happened to us one time. Like we increased splits on behalf of the agents. Like we gave them more money and we lost 2 agents. Right?
Probably because they didn't understand. They didn't understand what was happening.
Well, I don't blame them. That's our fault. We didn't choreograph it the right way. Right. And so we didn't get ahead. We didn't have the messaging. We didn't sit there and say, how are we going to say this?
And honestly, we could probably spend an entire hour talking about choreography, because this is something that, I mean, no team goes without its fair share of drama, changes, what have you, during the course of a year. And whenever something happens, whenever the boat gets rocked even a little bit, if you can choreograph the change, if you can choreograph the, around the problem, everything's fine. Everything's smooth sailing. Dude, like I guarantee you, if I had not taken your strategy, your choreography, advice on a couple of key situations that happened with my team, I probably would have lost like 5 agents each time, at least.
Yeah, I remember one specifically when you went from one-on-one coaching to group coaching.
Yep.
And we choreographed that. And you were like, dude, it went super well according to plan.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not because I'm a genius. It's because I screwed it up before and then I had to go back and fix it. And then I was like, okay, here's the fixed version.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy is that I thought that we were going to get through agent accountability groups. I thought that we were going to get through one-on-one meetings, business planning workshops, quarterly team exercises, and all we've gotten through in this first hour is just agent accountability groups. But I think that I think it just speaks to the importance of them, right? And how much strategy is actually involved in the actual like meeting itself. and like the dialogues and everything. So I think that we can end here. I do have two more like kind of quick questions here for you to just put a bow on this.
I'll be brief on it for you.
Yeah. So in terms of specifically the contagion thing, right? Because I know this is not something that like you trust me. Like the first time that I learned about agent accountability groups, like we didn't talk about any of the shit that happens, right? I had no idea what to expect, that like week 3, someone was going to come in and just like give like the world's like shittiest goals. Like I just mentioned, right? Like 2 calls, and then I'm gonna like, pull weeds for like 5 minutes and then call it a day. I'm like, what the fuck, dude? So from a contagion perspective though, that's really where I feel like you can make or break. So a question that came to mind was, because I know that like you purposefully kind of do like a hodgepodge, right? Like a mixed bag of people in a group. So you're not just putting like all the top performers in a group. You're not putting all the mid performers in a group and the people that are basically one halfway out the door in another. You're purposefully mixing up the groups in the organization, presuming it's big enough, right? Like if it's a team of like 5 or 10, like they're probably all in a group together, but you're purposefully mixing it up. Now, are you kind of talking to the high performers like going into it, and are you kind of like pulling them aside? And what's that dialogue like if you are, to kind of get them to understand like they're the role models, so the leaders of that group, versus someone who's mid or low, and you know that you're probably going to have to like have a couple of like, they're not going to come in every week having hit their goals. Like you just know that's not going to happen.
So the first thing I'll say is I actually don't care about production when I pull somebody aside to be what I refer to as an informal leader in one of these things. I care about people who don't play the bullshit game. Excuse my language. I never curse on recorded videos or anything like that. Now, whether my dog gets out. Yes. Well, if my dog gets out and gets loose, you're going to have a whole different story. But
sorry, dude.
I'm just kidding. So here's the thing. I need the person who's just willing to call that person out. I don't actually care if they're a low producer or a high producer or a mid producer. Because here's the thing. I give them in the first week, for sure, probably first 2, maybe even up to 3, I give everybody else the language of accountability. They ask questions the way that I ask because I demonstrate it. So first of all, you're not going to have a low producer going, that's terrible, to a mid producer, not because they don't think it's terrible, but because that would never be the language we use inside this. Right? We would never use that kind of language, the language that we use. And so when I first launch it in the first week, I teach them the language that we use. Hey guys, accountability is not condemnation and judgment. It's observing and noticing without condemnation and judgment. So when somebody does call somebody else out, first of all, I've demonstrated what it looks like to be a reflective surface, right? Second, when somebody does do something like that, I go, hey, can you rephrase that in a way that doesn't demonstrate condemnation or judgment? And I make them feel kind of like a jerk, and they'll either A, not speak up, or if they're the right person that I was hoping they are, they're going to show up the next time and ask it differently. Right? So usually, by the way, and actually, let me say one quick thing. I do care. It can't be a brand new agent. The brand new agent is not the person that I'm going to let kind of float that. But a mid or top, I don't really care. But I do need a person who's just kind of ruthless, and they're like, I don't care what other people think if I ask them this. And like, I'm okay with calling out somebody. Right? So I like to have those people inside there. And the conversation is really simple. Hey, Danny, I've noticed this, that you really understand the balance between tension and safety. And you have that keen eye of when somebody's kind of trying to sell something or undersell or sandbag a little bit, but then you also know, so I'm also setting this up, then you also know how to not just be rude about it, but actually, be strategic about how you say it. I like the way that you kind of approach those things. I've just noticed it amongst, other interactions, and also in the last time we did it, right? I've just kind of noticed that is something that you're really good at. So if you don't mind, I'm actually going to be counting on you to kind of be my backup facilitator this time around. Can I count on you for that? What I'm doing is I'm complimenting their ability to balance safety and tension.
No, I love that.
That way,
and
when they decide to speak up, they're like, hold on, I have to say it the specific way that Isaac praised me for, so I can continue to get praised. Because what gets rewarded gets repeated.
That's awesome, man. Well, I think that unless you have anything else that you want to add, to the end of this, like, I really feel like that's a pretty comprehensive overview of agent accountability groups. And yeah, man, this has been awesome.
Yeah. The last piece I will add is there is a set of rules that we roll out, and we actually have them sign it. And we can share that as a PDF in this training.
Yep.
But it's really basic rules: be on time, don't be eating, you can't have an unexcused absence. And here's what I'll also say: that I, as the facilitator, am not the judge of rules, of whether somebody violated the rules. It's the group. Here's why. I know that person better than most of their agent peers, and I want to cut them slack. I'll give you one super short example. Do we have time for a super short example?
Yeah, of course.
There was an agent, showed up. We were like, why'd you miss last week? Or why were you late? Not miss. You can't miss. But why were you late? Oh, well, I couldn't find a babysitter, blah, blah, blah. And I'm a dude. I'm married. She's a single mom. I cannot relate. Mm-hmm. So what I immediately want to do is go, it's okay. It happens. I get it, because I'm here to support you. Right? So as a facilitator, if it was my call, I'd have let her slide. But it wasn't my call. Another agent goes, not a valid excuse. What? She's like, my daughter's sitting over there on her iPad in the conference room. So she got to hold her accountable in a way that would seem so ruthless from me, but was totally relatable to her. And then, by the way, this is the added benefit. They didn't get in an argument or anything. They ended up a third person spoke up and goes, oh, well, what was the problem? She's like, well, their daycare is like, it's either all or nothing, right? And it was closed, and every other daycare is all or nothing. And one of the other people in the group goes, oh no, I have a daycare. You could do drop-ins. You could do half days. And so all three of them ended up using the same daycare. So actually someone brought a solution forward. That solution would have never been brought forward if the other person didn't hold them accountable in a way that I never would have. So that's the other piece, is make sure you read those rules and understand that you, as the facilitator, you don't set goals yourself. You don't make commitments inside that room. You are simply the facilitator, and you do not judge as to whether or not somebody has a valid excuse for being late or missing. That is the group's responsibility.
100%. And by that same token, it's also the group's responsibility to judge whether or not, or to decide whether or not someone is excused, right? Like if they,
that's it.
Right. And so that, like, what does the group think? Right. And so if there's like, that would be an example, right? They're late. I think, like, if you miss one time, you're out of the group, right? You miss one time, you're out of the accountability group.
Yep.
Then we and then we put it in the group. What does the group think? Normally the group is way nicer than I am, but sometimes, I did experience, people getting kicked out of the group for sure. And we could put those rules as a PDF as well in the,
let's do that.
Some of those standard rules. Yeah.
And by the way, if you ever have it, this is a quick little tip too. Like, these are the things that you don't find in the PDF. If you ever have somebody that bows out, you celebrate and praise the heck out of that person. Because here's what they're actually telling you. I respect you and the group and the sanctity of this process too much to continue to show up late and not honor my commitments. So we call him out on that. We go, hey, so real life story. And I know he wouldn't mind sharing this, even if this got on YouTube, because he knows how much I respect him. This guy, Ivan, he quit halfway through. And it was for that. He respected the process and the people too much. He was showing up late. They were giving him passes. He was not honoring his commitments. And he's like, honestly, Isaac, I feel like I'm letting the rest of the team down by, I just can't make this commitment. It was irresponsible for me to commit this time around. Awesome. Love it. Praised him. Told him how amazing he was. Told the group about it the next time we met. Hey, here's what Ivan did. He respects you guys too much. Next time around, he came back like a killer. All right. Sometimes people are just having an off 6 weeks. That's okay. Yeah. Praise the fact that they respected the process enough to bow out. Those are my favorite people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great way to end, because that's a really, like, awesome little tidbit there. And And yeah, man, I can just say, to wrap things up, he just gave you Isaac just gave you the nuts and bolts of it all. I can tell you, once you implement this, you will see a change in your organization. You will notice people honoring their commitments more than they did before. And when they honor their commitments, ultimately that moves the needle in the right direction. Like, you want to increase productivity and sales. This is like the number one hack, I would say, over anything else.
Well, here's the other thing too. Imagine that your agents are building community around accountability and honoring commitments instead of around happy hours. Like, happy hours do not build the same level of intimacy and awareness and accountability and ultimately lead to productivity. They lead to hangovers. That's what happy hours do. So we all have fun and do all that fun stuff, right? But they're building relations. They're checking in with each other every single day. They're getting to know each other's goals and aspirations and their weak spots and their ability to honor a commitment. And what happens is informal leaders start rising up, relationships start being built. It's a really amazing process.
It really is.
If you want to build culture, build one of accountability.
Love it, man. This was great. Thanks, brother.